Hello, everyone. Welcome back to What a Comedian. This is Natalie, the current host, and have always been host. It's been a while. I'm not gonna lie. Life has been pretty hectic with college results and just several other factors of like school finals, different. I performed on stage. That was really cool, but it's been pretty good. Uh, it's been very interesting for sure. I've definitely grown a lot as this past few months because of just much introspection and honestly other interactions with other human beings. And honestly, I've not been really much updated in the comical part or comedy scene that much. I've been really enjoying the new show Severance. I find it very interesting, and it's a very dystopian world where I would be curious to actually participate in being a severed person, because that's such a interesting concept of how people discuss the work-life balance and how you literally have this balance between you just completely separate them. And yeah, I'm very interested in it. I'm all caught up, just waiting for the episodes to release every week. Other than that, I've been watching some comedy, but not much. I've been really into Conan O'Brien's Friend recently, and sometimes I actually used to enjoy listening to it. Not much, but still enjoy it when Conan talks to other guests. However, I've grown, or as time goes on, I've actually much more enjoyed Conan's bits with his friends, such as Sona and Matt, Dr. Arroyo, Jordan Schlansky. Just having several of these guests with him, not really guests, but co-workers with him. It's actually very interesting to see how they interact, how Conan just freely jokes with them, how he makes fun of them. And it's a great transition to actually my guest today. He was the head monologue writer for Conan O'Brien and has been working for him has worked with him, for 27 years. That's a large run. That's 10 years older than I am, and I'm 17. If you couldn't calculate that. But it's very interesting to talk to such a seasoned writer and stand-up comic. Although he used to work for Conan as a writer, he's always been part of or trying to become on the stage. Not become on the stage, not being on the stage. Even during the television strike in 2008, or just several other occasions, he's tried to go on Letterman. His dream was originally to go on Johnny Carson, as you hear in this next episode. So I think it's a very interesting conversation with a freaking Emmy Award winner. And it's very interesting to discuss the different, I guess, backgrounds and behind the scenes of in a TV show compared to pure live comedy and the transition between those two. So I hope you enjoy, and yeah. How and when did you want to start out as a comedian?
I started as a kid. I wanted to be a comedian, but I didn't know how people became comedians.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't know how that happened, you know? And when I was a kid, if there were comedy clubs, I never heard of them. I don't know if there were any. So I didn't know how people became comedians. But there was a show called The Dick Van Dyke Show
Mm-hmm.
that I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I've heard of it. I've never seen it though.
So it was in reruns when I was a kid, and it would be on, you know, after school or whatever. And he was a comedy writer for a television show. So even as a kid, I realized, television shows need writers, need comedy writers. So I could do that because that was a real, in my little 10-year-old mind, I was like, oh, that's a real job.
Yeah.
And so, as much as I like jokes and I fantasize about being a comedian, I thought I'd go the more practical route and become a comedy writer.
That's much more practical, I believe. Did you have any like inspirations to go into this?
It's funny. I come from a big family, and my brother was the smart one,
Yeah.
and my older sister was kind of my mother's pet, and my younger sister was kind of my father's favorite. So I had to kind of carve a niche for myself. So being the funny one gave me some attention and some cachet. And when, guests would come over, I always had a joke ready for them and that kind of thing. And I think getting laughs in school, in the class, I think that was kind of the highlight of my day a lot of times.
Yeah. I definitely like relate to that. Not that like I'm basically an only it's hard to explain. I'm not an only child, but my age gap with my sibling is so wide that I'm basically an only child. But
Yeah.
I do find a lot of joy like during in classes, not being exactly like the class clown, but just like cracking jokes and seeing them laugh. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling, isn't it?
It is really nice. Did you have like much experience or like classes did you take in like high school or college for this?
No, I wish I had. I wish I had, in terms of theater classes and stuff. After college, I would kind of get, when I started doing stand-up, I got a lot of left-handed compliments where people would be like, oh, you're a very good writer. But it's like, well, I wasn't writing things and handing them out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was kind of that I had to work on as a comic, you're both a writer and a performer.
Mm-hmm.
So I really had to work on my performing side and being comfortable on stage and so on. So I did take some acting classes after a few years, which helped me just be a little more grounded on stage and present and all that kind of thing.
Okay, so I saw that you started doing like open mics and like stand up when you're in college. So when you were trying to strive for like a career, were you always like thinking of becoming more of a comic yourself or as just like a writer, as you said before?
Well, once I started doing stand up, I thought that I could have a stand up career,
Mm-hmm.
and then I kind of hoped to kind of make it big as a stand up.
Yeah.
So I just put all my energies into that. And, I didn't know what the future would hold. I felt as long as I was getting, my goal was to get on the Johnny Carson show, which was the Tonight Show.
Yeah.
So, Jimmy Fallon is the host now, but Johnny was a host for like 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't make it. I got by the time they put me on with Jay, Johnny had left like a year earlier. But that was sort of my goal. And for comedians my age, and really even comedians actually much older than me, the goal for so many of us was to get on Johnny Carson. And some people could become famous overnight on Johnny Carson. It really just, it's so different now because back then there were only 3 networks. He was the only thing on after 11:30.
Mm-hmm.
So millions of people watched every night.
Yeah.
And so it was a bit of a different world. But, that's what I dreamed of, And to me that would, if I got there, then I would be successful.
It's like your
You
big
know?
break.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You did go on Letterman a few times, though.
I did. So what happened to me when I was 25, I auditioned for Letterman,
Mm-hmm.
and the producer was very complimentary, and then they called me to do the show 17 years later.
Wow. That's a reunion for sure. So when you were like trying to make it as like a like having your break, I guess, did you have to pick up like day jobs to say per se or to pay the bills?
You know what? I never did. I had had some bad day jobs when I was, 22 and 23 and thereabouts. And after my last one, I just promised myself I would never have a, a lame job again. So I just did stand up and then I got hired at Conan
Mm-hmm.
and then I did that for a long time. And so um, I was able to, so far, keep the keep that promise to myself and not have to ever have to have a terrible job.
Okay. How did you land the Conan job, by the way?
Well, it's funny. So it's funny now because when I talk to people and they ask for advice and whatever, one of the things I tell people is to kind of carve a niche for yourself
Mm-hmm.
because that's the best way of being. I found of otherwise there's just too many other people doing it. So because I wanted to be on Johnny Carson,
Yeah.
I would work clean. I wouldn't swear. I would do all my jokes I could do on television, and also I wouldn't do local jokes because you couldn't do a joke about you know a deli in Boston if you're on a national TV show or
Yeah.
whatever. So or the sports teams or whatever. So I um, because I worked clean. I accidentally carved a niche for myself. I didn't realize I was doing it, but in hindsight, it was a sort of fortuitous because what would happen is um, there'd be big comedians like Brian Regan or Rita Rudner or Jerry Seinfeld. These comedians would national comics like that would come into town sometimes, and they would want an opener, and they would need somebody clean to open for them. So I would get picked to open for all those people,
Mm.
and I was kind of the go-to person. And then what happened was there are certain national comics that came in, and they worked dirty, but having me open for them was a nice contrast.
Gives them
So
a
when
big
they
effect.
swore, exactly. If they heard swear words 20 times before they went on, it had sort of no impact on the crowd. But if they hadn't heard any swears, and then they went on, and boom.
Yeah.
So working clean actually having that reputation. Also, I would write jokes every day.
Mm-hmm.
I did do a lot of topical jokes. So, so when some friends of mine got hired at Conan, they were like, okay, this guy writes jokes. He writes clean jokes. He writes topical jokes. He can write topical jokes, whatever. So um, they said, hey, can you submit? And since I'd been doing that every day, reading the newspaper, writing jokes out of it, whatever, um, it was sort of what I had been doing. It was just
Yeah.
sort of second nature to me. So I sent in a bunch of jokes, and they said, "Yep, you start tomorrow." And the Conan show at that time was very shaky. I had 13-week contracts. I thought I was going to work there for 13 weeks, possibly 26 weeks, put a little money aside, and then just come back home and go back to stand up. But the show kept going, and I kept going with it.
Yeah, you kept working there, so you got like 20 years of experience under your belt.
Yeah, I was there 27 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's more than I'm alive. So when you were writing for the Conan show, when you have to write like monologues about the daily news, was there a certain like time crunch to it, you would say?
Sure, sure. We were under the gun every day. It was actually a lot of pressure. You know, I would write 5 jokes for myself when I was just doing stand up every day.
Mm-hmm.
And there, we would write 40 jokes. a day. I would write 40 jokes, and I didn't realize I could write that many.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, where you train yourself to run 400 meters, and then all of a sudden you have to run a marathon every day. It was like, whoa, I didn't know I could do
Yeah.
this, you know. So it was a lot of pressure, and we were dependent on the news, and some days it'd be terrible news days, and that was tough. But yeah, I just went in and did my best every day, and I got better at it, and I figured out some things what to do on a slow news day, and that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah. Is there any much like difference between like writing for a monologue rather than like writing for like a skit or like a certain bit that Conan does?
Sure, sure. Um, you know, a the monologue is very much of that day. It's, you know, it's Valentine's Day. Here's a Valentine. You know, the
Yeah.
president is in France today. Blah blah blah. Whatever. But a sketch can be timeless. You can just do a sketch about a guy. You know, Conan. The sketch could be Conan gets the hiccups, and
Mm-hmm.
his doctor comes in, and you know whatever the sketch is. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So, um, and I didn't have that experience writing sketches. I ended up, I probably would write one or two sketches a year for the
Wow.
show. Most of the time I was writing the monologue, but I was also, um, because I was a joke writer, they would do in those days what they call desk bits. So Conan would go to the desk, and there'd be a little comedy bit there, and it would be maybe year 2000s or celebrity surveys or whatever the different things we were. And a lot of those were very joke heavy. So that played to my strength as opposed to some of the sketches were too. Uh, that was a little bit harder for me because it was more conceptual. The hardest thing we did a bit called New Characters, which is just what it sounds,
Yeah.
and I don't think I ever had one. I, because I need something that's rooted in something,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to yeah, it can be anything. If you say it can be anything, I can't think of anything.
Like there
You
needs to
know?
be like at least like one idea or like something you root off of.
Yes, that's for me. Now, other people obviously could do it. I kind of liken it to, you know, your English teacher says, write about anything. I can't think of anything. If they say, write about mice, okay, I've got three ideas. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So for me, that having that specificity, if I can pronounce that word correctly, um, that helped me immensely as a just having that little. And even when I would think of jokes, I I tend not to think of broad topics. I think of something small, and I play off of that.
Okay. And when you were writing like um some like different jokes, did you have to like think of it as not writing for your own in your own voice or like writing in a way Conan says things?
That's a very good question. So I did have to, when you do write for a show, and even, you know, even if you're writing a sitcom, you have to put the jokes in the character's voice,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and in writing for a talk show host, you know, when people would send in submissions for Conan, there could be funny stuff there, but it often was not in his voice. It was very sarcastic. It was maybe too pointed politically, too heavy-handed politically, or it would be maybe too graphically dirty or something that's like, well, that's not Conan. So I was fortunate that, um, you know, he and I had very similar backgrounds of big Irish Catholic families. We grew up in the neighboring towns. We had a lot of the same sort of repressed Irish things.
Yeah.
But I think one thing, you know, I used to like wordplay jokes, and Conan hated those, and he beat those out of me. And, you know, there was a story when I was first there about a woman who she gave birth on the subway,
Mm.
and they wrapped the baby in the Sunday New York Times.
Yeah.
And I had a joke about it. Ironically, it was the C-section or something like that was the
Mm-hmm.
joke. I thought it was clever, whatever. He crossed it out, but you know, and I came to discover that any wordplay kind of thing he did not like. Although I will say, this he would always have some rule, and then there'd be exceptions to the rule. Where you go, the rule is this, and then you go, well, wait a minute, what about this?
Yeah.
And if if it was a dirty joke and it was wordplay, he'd be like, "Oh, that cat's good." So it's like, well, wait a minute, that's also wordplay. So there was some of that, but he didn't like. So we even stopped writing those jokes for my act for the most part because he conditioned me to not. I was conditioned to not like those jokes anymore.
Do you have trouble after going off Conan? Did you have trouble when you started writing jokes for yourself, thinking of how you would say this rather than how someone else would say this?
Well, I've gotten to the point now, I know my own voice and I think, but I do think what I did have to do was I barely look at the news now because I don't want to be looking at the news and just thinking of topical jokes. When you're immersed in the news all day and you're writing 40 jokes off the news all day, I'm very ill-informed these days. I'm embarrassed, but I don't want to be thinking of monologue jokes all day.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I have a job to do it. Do you know what I mean? And also those jokes, they're gone sometimes the next day or sometimes a week later. They don't work anymore and whatever. So the jokes that I try to write for my act, I try to write so that I could put them on an album a year from now or put them on a comedy special or something so that 5 years from now they'll still work as opposed to what happened? So
the people won't need context or
exactly.
information before to understand the joke.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that why you do so many one-liners in your act, you would say?
No, it's funny because when I started, as a kid I would write jokes and so I just got in the habit of that. But when I started, I tried to do impressions. I was the worst impressionist you've ever heard. I tried to do sort of observational bits. I tried to do, I tried to tell story. I tried everything.
Yeah.
And pretty quickly, I realized, you know what? I'm just good at this. I'm just going to write jokes. And then every once in a while, I'd try to write a bit or I'd try to write a story. And I'd be like, oh, get back to your jokes. So I've just kind of resigned myself of, you kind of have to go with your strength. And not to say, I see people and they'll tell a long story and it's very funny and they whatever. And I think, I wish I could do that, you know. And people go up and just talk about their life or they talk about, the way Seinfeld can dissect any kind of topic. I'm envious of that. But I've come to realize you just have to do what you do and just try to get better at what you do.
I see. Just continue improving on your strengths.
Yeah, and you're whatever kind of writer you're going to be. It's very hard to be a great horror writer and a great science fiction writer and a great romance writer and a great novelist and a great. It's kind of like you got to kind of pick a lane, I think, and just because what you don't want to be is pretty good in a few areas.
Yeah.
But not. It's better to be great at one thing than be okay at a bunch of things because they can always find somebody who's okay.
Yeah.
But what they want is they need someone who's really good at their one thing.
Have you listened to advice? You've written novels.
I know. That was actually a nice break from me because I was an English major. I love to read.
Yeah.
And also after years of working clean and just doing jokes to actually tell a story and not worry about this is very dirty
yeah.
or very dark or whatever, not worry about the parameters. It was very freeing for me to do something quite different, you know.
Do you try to sprinkle in a little bit like a dark humor or some would say offensive in your like acts?
Do I try to sneak in offensive jokes?
Maybe.
Well, I do. I have to admit, I won't say I try to sneak in offensive jokes, but I do. I do have a dark sense of humor,
Me too.
and I think because of my demeanor, I think I'm able to get away with certain jokes. You know, I worked with a guy just last night who he gives off such a creepy vibe. When if he does a joke about having a woman in his trunk, people are like, this guy probably does have a woman in his trunk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they are creeped out. Whereas I feel like I can do some dark jokes and they know it's a joke and I'm usually okay.
Yeah. Okay. When you were like writing for like let's just say Conan or even like the 2013 White House Correspondents' Dinner, did you have to limit yourself and be like, oh, I can't talk about this too much, but since it's like, yeah,
Well, I mean, then we're just generating a lot of jokes and what's everyone's Conan picks. But it's so funny because in those situations, and this happens time and again, you have sort of your mainstream jokes.
hmm
But then when it's a specific crowd, you try to do a very sort of esoteric joke just for them. You go, oh, here's my normal stuff, but this one's just for them. They're gonna love it, whatever. No, they just like the regular stuff, and it's so funny how that happens time and again. Where I did an old person's home uh, a while ago, and I wrote a specific joke about an old movie that was like, no one would get this joke, but they will because it's from their era. They'll know
hmm
this, whatever. Nope, totally wrong. So, you know, it ends up being the mainstream thing is ends up being what everybody likes, even if you're writing for a specific target. I find.
yeah, okay. So you mostly try to keep your jokes more to a general sense rather than like,
Yes, I'll give you an example. So we would go to Comic-Con every year in San Diego,
hmm
and I am not a Star Wars guy. I'm not a Lord of the Rings, whatever. But I would get a lot of jokes on if, if because my jokes everybody could get.
yeah,
Other people's jokes were so esoteric that people are like, "Well, that's so obscure. I don't know that."
hmm
Now would have the same thing. Conan hosted the NFL honors, and I would write these very obscure NFL jokes,
hmm
and those would not get picked because I was thinking, it's funny how, whereas with the sci-fi stuff, I'm coming in, with no knowledge, so therefore all my stuff is accessible. And with coming with the NFL joke, it's like I've got years of watching football games, and then my jokes were too obscure. So sometimes having no knowledge, you're kind of a clean slate.
Yeah, I can see how that works since like most of the people or most of the fans probably don't know like the such obscure knowledge, but they have like a general sense of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you were on Conan for like 27 years, and there was like three different versions of Conan, like the Tonight Show, just Conan, and like the Late Show. Were there much differences in these different jobs?
Yes. Yes. The late night with Conan, we were on at 12:30,
hmm
and we were on so late that we could definitely be much more experimental and be very sort of wacky
Yeah.
and silly and out there. When you got the Tonight Show, now we moved to an earlier time slot. Now people are really watching, and before it was just kind of our fans.
Yeah.
So they would go with us. They liked our silly sketches and our wacky things. Now this is a very mainstream, older crowd. Um, it's kind of like instead of doing a show for your friends, you're doing a show for your parents and their friends. So it's a different sensibility. It's not really your sensibility because the sensibility is what you and your friends like.
Yeah.
So this was kind of trying to appeal to an older demographic, try to appeal to a broader audience. Also, we had a nice little studio in New York, and when you have a small space, you can be much more subtle, and with a bigger space, the humor tends to, you have to kind of broaden the humor, which wasn't really our humor. Once a year we'd do a trip where we'd go to Chicago for a week or Dallas for a week or something. So we'd be performing for like 5,000 people. Conan, the show, the audience would be like 5,000 people. Those kind of things would end up being very, very broad, sort of crowd-pleasy jokes, but nothing sort of subtle or clever. It had to be sort of hitting them over the head with a hammer. And I think for us, I think we like the sort of subtle humor more, and so I think we're better off with a smaller studio. And when we got back on the Conan show on TBS, we could kind of go back to doing the stuff that we didn't really. TBS kind of left us alone and didn't give Conan a lot of notes. We could kind of do whatever we wanted, and we could appeal to our fan base as opposed to trying to appeal to a broader base. So that show was actually much more fun because we were doing. You want to do stuff that you think is funny, not just like, well, they'll like this. You want it's so much better when you like it and hopefully they agree.
Yeah. When you like try to perform in front of like, no matter like large audiences or just even just like a little studio audience, do you try to appeal to this live audience more or more to the TV and like cameras?
Well, as much as you want to appeal to the cameras and the TV, you just have the audience in front of you, and you just have to, because the people at home are very much influenced by the studio audience. If someone's bombing in front of the studio audience and they're at home going, "I think this guy's pretty funny," they're watching him bomb and they're going, "Oh," you know what I mean? So you've got to win over the studio audience, and they're the only audience you have in front of you, so you don't know what people are doing in their living rooms and their bedrooms while they're watching you. So you just have to do the best you can for the audience in front of you.
Okay. And when, let's just say, your shows were going on like 12:30, did you stay up to watch it?
No. I would watch the taping.
Yeah.
So I would see it live. We taped it in New York. We taped it 5:30. In LA, I think we taped at 4:30. But I would watch the taping and see how the jokes went and how the sketches went. And I didn't watch the guests that often unless it was somebody I was very excited about, because really you're working. So even though the show starts, I'd see how the comedy goes, and then I'm writing for the next day.
Yeah.
No, I would not stay up and watch.
Yeah. And also, when you were writing these jokes, did you ever consider like, oh, this like should be like, we should strive to be Emmy nominated or like winning like certain awards, or was that really just like kind of like a side, like, oh, that just like a side benefit?
Well, that's a good question. We didn't do a thing which I wish that we had of. I would have done like a special show once a month with the Emmys in mind. But the way it works is it's almost like if you're writing for a newspaper or a daily show like that, you're just putting out fires every day, and you're just trying to get the best show for that day that you can and get it on the air. So to me, as much as I wish that we had done a thing of, okay, we're going to really prepare for the special show on the 15th, and that's going to be our Emmy show, it never ended up happening because we were always just doing the best we could for that day. And then looking back, we'd look over a bunch of shows and go, well, I think this was the best one of the year. But it was never, let's plan a special show and have that be our Emmy show. That never, that never ended up happening.
When you looked back on your shows, how did you guys like decide which one was the best? Was it more like a subjective humor, or did you have guys look at like ratings and different like opinions of the audience?
Well, you know, ultimately it was everything went through Conan, you know. So um, he was he was much hard, you know, he was a tough nut to crack. He had very certain standards and he had certain thought. You know, the irony is that there were times where you'd write a joke or you'd write a sketch that he loved, and you were like, oh, thank he actually finally, you know, loved something that we wrote, and then sometimes it didn't do
Yeah.
great. So you want to say to the audience, Conan liked it. Do you know how hard it is to get Conan to like something?
Yeah.
You guys should like it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So there were times where, you know, we felt like the Conan hurdle was the hardest one to get over, and the audience hurdle wasn't as high. And then sometimes we get over that one and not the other one. Um, and then sometimes there were things that he didn't care for that much, and then it would kill, and it was like, phew, okay. So, um, but you know, we would, you know, our Andy Richter would weigh in on things, and our head writer would weigh in on things, but ultimately it was Conan who made all the decisions.
Okay. I mean, I guess that makes sense. He was the executive producer, and he is the one performing all the things.
Yeah, and his name is on the show. So
Yeah.
it's funny because when I was first there, I wrote a sketch and I sent it to the head writer, and he liked it, and he's like, "Oh, this is very funny," and blah blah blah. And then a week later, I said, "Well, what happened with that?" He said, "Oh, Conan didn't like it." And I thought, "Well, what if we did?" It's like, no, that was the end of it. And I was like, "Oh, okay." I that was news to me. I kind of thought um, that it was a little more democratic or something.
Yeah.
It was like, nope. If Conan doesn't like it, that's that.
It's a
So
dictatorship.
yes,
Yeah. Okay, so you also worked like 1 year, I think, with Ellen DeGeneres. Was
yeah.
what was it like working with her compared to like working with Conan?
Well, you know, Conan, you know, he and um, I think, you know, we're connected more. You know, I was only there for that 1 year, and she was perfectly nice. I don't feel like I'm close to her. You know, Conan and I will still text about the Red Sox or
Yeah.
something, you know, and I would never text Ellen. She'd be like, "What are you doing?" You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and also for me, working on late night and then going to daytime, there were just different sensibilities. And I would pitch something in the room, and the writers you know, the head writers would laugh and go, "We can't do that." And I was like, "What?" There was things that just seemed so innocuous to me, but daytime is just a different beast, and it has to be a little more gentle. And then sometimes there'd be something where it would be kind of dirty, and they'd put it on, and I'd be like, "Well, wait a minute, how can
Yeah.
you do that?"
There's always
So
exceptions.
exactly. So and it was just a daytime and late night. They're definitely different sensibilities, you know.
What's like the difference between daytime and like night?
Well, um, like we would do a bit on Ellen where we would show funny kids' answers on their homework. So there'd be funny little things, and then we would just show them. And at Conan, if we did something like that, we would make them up. You know, we used to do a
Yeah.
bit called children's drawings where they were fake drawings. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were all bits of, you know, here's Conan getting ready for the show, and you see he's, you know, he's a vampire or something or whatever, you know, and it's like we'd have one where, you know, Andy's girlfriend stopped by today and it's a drawing of a sheep or whatever.
Yeah.
Jokes like that,
Yeah.
where with the Ellen show, they'd actually show children's things, you know. So we were, the Ellen Show, they're actually being sincere, and we were never sincere on
I
the
mean,
Conan Show.
humor is very deceptive, so
Yes.
yeah. You mentioned earlier how you felt like every day was like kind of like putting out fires at the Conan show. Was there a bigger fire to put out on Mondays?
No, Mondays I found it to be an easier day because you had the news from Saturday, Sunday, and Monday.
More
So,
material.
pardon?
More material?
We had more material. So stuff would happen over the weekend. Um, so I always felt like Monday morning we had a treasure trove of premises where by Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday we would start to run out of things to talk about.
Did you have more, like, did you want to try to cover, like, everything that happened in the weekend? Or did you more like, oh, I like this joke, so I'll just do this one?
Yeah, I mean that was one of the things was, you know, you had to weed out topics you wouldn't talk about. You know, if there's a plane crash and 200 people died, well, we're not gonna. That could be the big story, but
Yeah.
we're not gonna do anything on that. So, and once again, we would write our jokes and submit to Conan, and Conan might be like, "Hey, I want more jokes about the president's birthday, and I don't really care so much about that it's." Some celebrity got married or whatever,
Yeah.
So he would we'd write our jokes, and he would not only would he pick the jokes he liked, he'd pick the topics he liked for us to write stuff on.
Okay, okay. So you had to survive, like, the television's guild strike in, like, 2008.
Yes.
And since your main, I guess, income was gone, how did you, like, deal with it? Especially with, like, the 2008, like, financial crisis.
Yeah, no, that was definitely tough, and I mean, um, and for me, my wife wasn't working at that time. She was a stay-at-home mom at that point, and for a few years when our kids were little. So, um, that was definitely a difficult time. I think, I'm pretty good about saving,
Mm-hmm.
and then also, I was more fortunate than most that I could go out and do stand-up, so I could make some money, even though it was, uh, not a lot. At least it was something, because some of the people I work with are just writers, and then they had no income coming in under that. So I was fortunate, and we were in New York, and our kids are going to public school, so that helped. Um, but yeah, and also with a strike, you don't know how long it's going to last. I think this one lasted about 3.5 months, so it's definitely tough when that kind of thing happens. But you have to put away money for a rainy day and that kind of stuff for when those things happen.
Do you think it was harder to get stand-up gigs since, like, a lot of other people also were trying to get these jobs?
Well, I was fortunate again in that, um, I had some TV credits. Being on Letterman and being on Conan and being on the Tonight Show and so on, that stuff helped. And once again, the fact that I could work clean meant that I could do some theater shows. I could do shows for an older crowd or whatever. So that gave me some flexibility also.
What is your favorite type of, like, stand-up gig, would you say?
That's a good question. It's always thrilling to go on TV
Mm-hmm.
and do a spot. That was always, you know, um, when I would do Letterman, you know, it's funny because what I learned from doing those shows was there was always a moment of terror, whether it was the night before or the morning of. There'd be a part where I was like, oh my God, these jokes are terrible. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to bomb. Why am I in this situation? Blah, blah, blah. And I learned that it would pass. It was just one of those, it's just part of it. It was just
Yeah, part of the
one
process.
part of the process. So once I kind of learned that, and then I would have that moment of terror, I'd be like, okay, this is the part where I'm terrified,
Yeah.
you know, and then I would kind of go through that. So, um, but for me, uh, going on Letterman, for example, and having it go well, um, that was very exciting, and that was something that I felt like, um, you know, it felt like, hey, I did this thing,
Yeah.
and that made me feel good.
It was like a really big accomplishment considering you were on like live
Well,
television.
yeah, I mean, it did. It's funny because, it's all relative, and, you know, Conan would do a show for a couple million people a night and sort of not think much about it. Or for me, it was like this one day every 2 years is the highlight of my
Yeah.
year,
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, exactly. But for me, it was a big deal.
Mm-hmm. And when you were doing like these stand-up gigs, you definitely have probably bombed a few shows. I'm not
Sure.
I'm not saying it's much, but um how did you get over like let's just say like not winning the crowd over?
Yeah, I mean, it happens, and I still feel bad to this day if I have a bad show, and now even if a show that I didn't say bomb, but it wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling, that's still a bad feeling. I think what you try to do is kind of figure out why that happened, and sometimes it's just not your audience. And sometimes if the person in front of me goes on and they're really dirty and the audience loves them, then it could be hard for me because they might
Yeah.
be like, in comparison, I might be like, okay, I'm not really what they want or whatever. So, and then also sometimes you get a situation where you get hired to do an office Christmas party, for
Mm-hmm.
example, and they don't want a comedian. They're at their Christmas party, they're milling around, they're having fun, they're talking to each other, whatever. And they go, okay, here's a comedian. And they're like, we don't want a comedian,
Yeah.
So those situations are tough because you're imposing comedy on people that don't want it.
Yeah.
So there are situations you get in where you go, well, that really wasn't my fault. I when the audience is there for comedy and they're listening and whatever, and then if I go out and that doesn't go well, that's on me.
Yeah.
I can't, But if they're all milling around, not paying attention and whatever, you're like, well, I don't know what to do here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it doesn't feel good, but they're not even listening to your material, so it's not about that.
Yeah. But corporate gigs do probably pay the best, right?
They pay well. You never know what you're walking into. Some can be great. And I did a show week and a half ago for a Orthodox Jewish group, and the guy who booked me said, "You're gonna bomb." The guy last year bombed, and it was actually good. So no, and then other things you think it's going to be great, and then for whatever reason they're not into it. So it's it's hard to please every crowd, and you just have to just do your best and hope it goes over.
I'm surprised the person kept hiring comedians year after year even though they bombed.
I know there are things like that where I'm puzzled, where it's like, obviously they don't like this. Why do we
Yeah.
keep doing it?
Maybe
But
try a magician, you know?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as like a stand-up comedian and as a writer, you definitely try to do more planned jokes. Do you try to have some improv in you or like do some crowd work or do you just mostly like go with the flow?
I should do more crowd work than I do. If something comes up, I'll kind of deal with it.
Yeah.
I I guess I'm always have an eye for the future in a sense. So I'm always trying to build my act for my next comedy album, or if I can do another comedy special or something like that. So in my mind, it's like, well, the crowd work's not going to help me with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But I probably, I probably should do more crowd work. I should try to get better at it. I don't really like it because I don't care what this guy does for a living
Yeah.
or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But I do realize in certain situations, um, they would much rather just sort of have a conversation with me than have me present my act to them. So that's something that uh, I should get better at.
I mean, I feel like it definitely depends on the crowd. Like I've seen like definitely on social media, people definitely like crowd work a lot. Um,
Yes.
but at the same time, at like live shows, some people are more like, oh, I'm just wanting to see you perform. I don't want to be part of the act.
Yes, there's definitely crowds that are like, hey, hey, don't talk to us, just do your thing, you
Yeah.
know? So I do think there are, there also, I see a lot of, there's a handful of people who I think are great at crowd work, and I
Hmm.
just thoroughly enjoy it. I think there's a lot of people I see who do crowd work who I don't think are that good at it, but they do it anyway. Um, there's a, and then there are people who are great at crowd work, but their material isn't that good,
Yeah.
you know? So what happens is sometimes they're in a big theater and it's too big to do crowd work. You can't hear the people responding. You talk to the guy in the front row, half the audience can't hear that guy's response or whatever. So um, there's a handful of comics I know who are great at both.
Yeah.
They're great at crowd work and they're great. Their material is great. Those are few and far between. People tend to be one or the other, or a lot of comics are not great at either.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Like I see some people try to interact, and I'm like, that's not really it. But at the same time,
Yeah.
you got like freaking like Jimmy Carr doing like wanting heckles. It's like actually insane.
Oh yeah, his heckles, his responding to hecklers are amazing.
Yeah, I just love
Yeah.
watching that.
Yeah.
Do you try to? What are some like the worst heckles you've gotten? You think?
Oh, I've gotten every mean thing that you can imagine, and if you're going into comedy, whatever your physical flaw is, or you're most self-conscious about, they will attack that. They will find your weakness and go after that. So, um, you know, I've heard it so much. I just kind of shrug at this point. It doesn't. It's much harder now to hurt my feelings than it used to be.
You've
You
grown a
know.
thicker skin.
Yes, and it just you just kind of go, okay, this whatever the problem. And I remember I was in an acting class years ago, and my scene partner and I had to do something where we were talking about the scene, and the character was being verbally abused or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher's like, "Hey, so have you ever been in this situation?" I was like, "Oh yeah," and I told them all these things that people yelled at, and my scene partner was like, "What? People said that to you?" You
Yeah.
know, couldn't believe it. It's like, yeah, whatever the meanest thing you can imagine someone saying to you, people have said that to me. Yes.
Nah, I
I mean, you
see.
think about that. Like, if you go to a ball game, the way that fans will yell, particularly at the other team, it's the kind of thing that you get as a comic, you know?
Yeah. I definitely get that. Like in this is weird, but like in like high school games, there's definitely a certain amount of like spirit for for different high schools. So, I play tennis at my school, and when we play against like let's just say we have quads where we play against three other teams, so they all have like their own tents, and when we're playing against each other, we would like even though we have friends on that team, we would try to like be obnoxious and be like, "Yo, like we got it, like I don't care," or beefing with them or something. It's like it's really weird. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, the best thing is not to take it too personally and just think that, and, um, if you develop some heckler lines, that's great or whatever, but not let them rattle you because that's what they're trying to do, you know?
Okay. And since you perform like stand up like very often nowadays, I feel like doing something repetitively can get pretty like old or tiring.
Yeah.
What are some things you do to try to keep it new to you?
Well, even just one new joke. If I've got one new joke I'm excited about that I've never tried, that I feel good about, um, you know, here's the thing, I could have a great show and my one new joke doesn't work and I'm bummed out. And then I could have a mediocre show, but my one new joke kills and I go home like, hey, it's like
Yeah.
anyone watching would be like, hey, buddy, that show wasn't that great. but, but because my new thing worked, I get it. The joys of killing, if you have a great show, that's a great feeling. Also, having a new joke get a big laugh, that's, you know, when I go back to Boston, I'll see guys who've been doing the same act for 20 years or 30 years and haven't changed a word. And it's like, oh my God, please give me a break. So,
Yeah.
they got to be, they're making it such a chore where the fun part is you got a new joke, you're excited about it. You feel like you're still coming up with fresh stuff. So yes, I mean, the rest of your act might be the same, but when they're laughing, it kind of energizes you, and having that new stuff makes you feel like you're still, you still got it.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely relate to, I guess, the interacting with audiences because mostly I'm usually on like the other side. I usually am the audience, but like I've I've tried like performing and stuff, and it once there's like especially for larger crowds when there's like a larger crowd and they do like they like something hits, it's like really nice.
It is. It really
So
is. Yeah.
yeah. So you were also talking about earlier how you had to go, like you said, to like LA and New York to do like different comedy things. What are the differences in like the comedy scenes between like these few big cities?
Well, it's funny because New York is if you saw a bunch of comedians send you a tape of them doing a show, you could tell which ones are in New York. New York is almost its own presence in the room. There's just a different vibe in New York City where a comic could send you a tape from Kansas City or from Minneapolis or from Omaha or whatever, and you would be able to tell what city they're in. New York has such a presence to it. LA is different because so many people are from elsewhere, and it's a different thing. So I think, and New York comics tend to be a little harsher, a little rougher. I think less polite. So yeah, I think that there's a different vibe there than other places.
Okay. Do you think people in LA are more like people who do stand up, even though they do stand up, they try to like also dabble in other things, like mainly their main act is acting or something?
Yes, you do see a lot of that. You do see someone who, I worked with someone recently and they were like, folks, I'm an actor, but I'm also a comedian. And then after watching his act, the crowd's like, I think you're just an actor. But there are some people that are good at both. There's definitely people like that. I think that there were a lot of people 20 years ago who were actors who thought, well, let me do stand up to get some stage time, and then maybe I can get a sitcom, and then I can do what I'm really good at. I think there was some of
Yeah.
that. But yeah, I mean, you do have some people in LA who they're actors, they're singers, they're comedians, they're whatever. They're trying to, but I think it's very hard to succeed in multiple arenas.
Yeah, as you said, like you probably want more like one really good strength and
I think that's how I feel.
okay. Do you intend to try to do other acts or like be on like just say like a rehearsed like TV show or anything?
I would love it if somebody had me write on their sitcom or something. I feel like, you know, if I can write jokes in this room over here, I could also write jokes in that room over there,
Yeah.
you know? So I would love it. The business tends to pigeonhole people and they go, okay, you're a late night writer or whatever.
Mhm.
But to me, I've watched plenty of sitcoms in my life and I think I could write jokes for that if somebody would give me the chance.
I mean, yeah, I feel like comedy is a very universal thing no matter like what you work at.
If you know how to write a joke, if you know how to write a sketch or write funny dialogue, I think it can be in multiple things.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I actually saw one of your short film, the rental agency thing, and I was just
Oh,
wondering
okay.
how you got inspiration for that.
I'm a very morbid guy, so the idea of writing a short film where I'm dead is something that's right up my alley.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, it's just the kind of thing that I just thought of the idea, and it was my friend Ruthie who was in it with me. She and I went to high school together,
Oh.
and she's such a talented actor. So, and we had a very good director, so that just helped. Where having two people that know what they're doing certainly helped me a lot.
Yeah, okay. And I know that you're from like a smaller city near Boston, and I
Hmm.
know that many other famous actors and comedians are near the area from there. Do you think that the specific town you grew up in had something to contribute to your idea of going into this career?
Um, huh. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I had, it'd be interesting to see a parallel life where I grew up in the Midwest and what would have happened. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I know I always loved comedy from an early age. I can't say how much my neighborhood or my town influenced me. I don't know.
Was there much of a comedy scene there?
Well, I was sort of, it was, when I was kind of lucky in that there was a great comedy scene in Boston when I started, and there were great comics that were mentors of mine, and also um, the comedy boom kind of happened right at that time. So um, I was able to get a lot of stage time and get a lot of paid work in a fairly short amount of time because of the environment that I happened to be in.
Okay, okay. And I'm just wondering, since I'm part of like the younger generations, do you try to understand younger generations' humor?
I do, I think I did sort of a young sort of hipster room recently and it went very well and that made me feel great. Like, I actually like older crowds, but when I do, I you know, when I can make my kids laugh, that's makes me feel good. And um, I found when I have a younger crowd that's a smart crowd, then I like that.
Yeah,
you know, I think for me, it's not so much age. I think a dumb crowd of any age is going to be tough for me.
yeah.
You know, but there's a handful of shows that I do here in LA where um, it's a very young audience, and it makes me feel good when it goes well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I feel like because of my like personal experience, like interests, Because I like comedy, a lot of people are like, "Oh, that's such like an old man thing to like."
Well, okay.
No offense, no offense.
That's so funny. But I do think part of it is you have to be aware of society changing and so on. And there were things that were okay to say when I started that are not okay now.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be aware that some people dig their heels in, and I think, you know what, why is saying retarded, for example, so important to you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, a younger audience is just going to bum out. Why do you need to say it? Do you know what I mean? So I know that 30 years ago you could say it, but I think you have to be aware of the world changing, and you have to adapt or die.
Great words. I think that's it's motivational. Okay, so this is my last question of the day. What would your advice be to people who want to try to, like, commit to this career?
Well, if you want to be a stand-up, what my friend Lori Martin always says, do it every day for 10 years. If you do it every night for 10 years, you'll be good at it. And here's the thing, like, you talk about playing tennis.
Yes.
You could have somebody who's a terrific athlete, and they play tennis once a month. And then you have somebody who's a pretty good athlete, but they play tennis every day. The person who plays every day for years is gonna end up being better.
Yeah.
Even if the other person was a naturally better athlete. It's just how it works. So if you want to be a stand-up, and if you have some potential, go out and do 1 million shows, and then after 1 million shows, you'll be great at it. So you just have to put the time in and put the commitment, and don't expect overnight success. If you want a black belt in karate, you have to go. It's going to take you 10 years, and you got to go and do karate 5 times a week and whatever for 10 years. So these people that start out and go, I want a black belt. It's like, well, you just got here.
Yeah.
So, and then some people's lives, I meet people who are 45 and they've got 4 little kids, and they go, yeah, I want to be a comedian. It's like, well, you can't be out every night. You can't go on the road. You can't do all these things because, you've got other priorities. So, and then sometimes you get people who their kids are out of the house and now they can go do that, So, it's got to fit your life. And also in college, it's like, don't be doing stand-up every night while you're in college. Enjoy being in college.
Yeah.
And maybe do shows once a week or something or whatever, but don't miss out on your college experience because you're going downtown and doing open mics every night or whatever, So, if you can commit to it, if that's what you want, just go all in and give it your best shot. And if it doesn't happen, then you can, hopefully you have something to fall back on.
Plan B.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me.
You're a great interviewer, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm good.
No, you're great. So don't think that you're not.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe that'll be my future job. You never know.
You never know.
You never know. Oh,
well, great meeting you.
It was great meeting you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I hope to see you at a live show someday once I'm like old enough to go to shows. But
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Good luck with school and good luck with going to college.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. I hope you're not tired of my voice yet. Thank you for listening to this episode of What a Comedian. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Brian Kiley. I personally found it very rewarding. I don't know English that well, apparently. And I hope you have a great day, great night, what time, wherever you are listening to this podcast. If you are listening, that means you have no life, and that's okay because I don't either. So, you have a great day. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. I'll try to release more episodes more frequently, depending on my availability of time with school. But yeah, I'll keep you guys constantly updated, and have a good day.